Alright, so in today's video we're going to be talking about knives. And now we're going to go over 10 things you need to consider before purchasing a knife. And hopefully by the end of this video you'll have a good idea of what it is that you are looking for in your own personal knife. Stay tuned. Alright, so when you first decide to buy a knife, one of the very first things you need to consider is whether you want a high carbon steel or a stainless steel. Now a stainless steel is a lot easier to maintain. It's a lot harder to rust. You don't really have to do much to keep a stainless steel maintained. But when it comes to high carbon steel, the high carbon steel is going to adapt to its environment. It's going to patina, it's going to change over time, it's more likely to rust, and so you have to keep it clean and dry at all times. And so if you want to put a lot of time and energy into your blade and make it nice, a lot of people like high carbon steel, and they love that patina, they love how it adapts to its environment and changes, and it's a lot more personal, the high carbon steel, than the stainless. But like I said, if you don't want to put a lot of time and energy into your knife, a good stainless steel can be used, put in a drawer, and then it's ready when you need it. There's a lot less maintenance on a stainless steel than a high carbon steel. And so then the next thing we have to worry about is the hardness. And now usually, again, all of these rules, there's going to be exceptions. But in general, a high carbon steel is going to be harder than a stainless steel. And so a soft steel the edge is going to roll instead of chip. The tip is going to bend instead of break. And so you're going to be able to bend it back. You're going to be able to get those rolls out a lot easier. Where a harder knife is going to keep an edge a lot longer. It's going to stay sharp. It's going to be able to do a lot more work because it is harder. It's not going to bend as easy. It's not going to. It's going to be able to be. It's a lot more robust, and it's going to hold an edge and be sharper for a lot longer. So there's a lot of good things to consider on a harder steel. But again, the softer steel is going to be a lot easier to take care of. You're going to be sharpening it a lot more often than a harder knife, but it's going to be a lot easier. Again, if you're not careful, it's going to bend, it's going to roll. You're going to be able to get that out easier, but it's not going to hold its edge. So you're going to be sharpening it a lot more often than a harder knife. So again, when it comes to the high carbon steel versus stainless, the high carbon steel is a lot more maintenance. It's a lot more taking care of it and protecting it, where the stainless isn't as much, but you are going to be sharpening it a lot more often. So then next, you're going to want to think of the blade shape. So the shape of the knife is going to determine a lot as well. And the things you're going to consider when looking at the shape is like how flat is the blade. You can see here that this Mora is pretty flat and then it curves only on the tip. Where this Condor has a continuous curve to it. And so it's a lot more slicey. This is a lot more utility. And then you also have knives with a recurve, so it curves one way and then the other way. It's kind of like a S. It's S-shaped. And so that's something that you want to keep in mind, is what shape does the edge have on the knife? And you also want to worry about the tip. Where does the tip lie on your knife? So you can see in this Mora, it's kind of off to one side, where on the Condor, it's right in the middle. It's in line with everything and it's in the middle. And so with the tip to one side, I find that that's nicer for clearing out notches and stuff, where the inline tip is better for stabbing and kind of drilling a little bit and kind of getting stuff out. And so you're going to have to keep in mind what kind of tip and what kind of blade shape you want on your knives. The next thing you're going to want to pay attention to is the thickness. So you can see that this companion is a lot thinner than this Condor, and a thinner knife is going to slice and cut a lot better than a thicker knife, but a thicker knife is going to be able to handle a lot more work. It's a lot more robust. It's not going to bend as easily as a thinner knife. It's not going to break as easily as a thinner knife, but the thinner knife is going to cut a lot better. And so you're going to get a lot more control with a thinner knife than a thicker knife. But the thicker knife is going to be a lot more robust and be able to handle a lot more tasks, and it's going to hold up for a lot longer than a thinner knife in theory. And so that's something that you have to keep in mind as well. You kind of got to find that sweet spot. Too thick and it's not going to cut very well, and it's not going to perform a lot of those fine tasks. Too thin and it's going to cut really well, but it's not going to be able to do those larger tasks, and it's going to bend. And so you kind of got to find that sweet spot when it comes to blade thickness, and that's all just personal preference. Next you have to look at the blade style, the blade type. When I think of the blade type, I think of the grind. So you have a Scandi grind. This is a Scandi grind. We have a Saber grind, where the grind starts up a lot higher than on a Scandi grind. So you got to consider the different grinds, and you got to study what they're good at, what they're not good at, and you have to kind of determine what work you're going to perform with your knife, and you're going to have to find the grind type that does that job the best. Also, when I think of the edge style, the blade style, I think of the straight edge or serrations. And so not only do you have to worry about the grind, you have to worry about the edge. Is the edge going to be fully straight edge, or is it going to have serrations, or what do you need to perform the tasks you perform the most often? And so the grind and the serrations or straight edge are going to determine which is going to perform better for you when you're out there doing your work. Next, we're going to talk about blade length. Now the blade length determines a lot as well, because a shorter blade is a lot easier to control and manipulate, where a longer blade is harder to control, but it can perform much bigger tasks. I can baton a lot bigger piece of wood with a bigger knife than a smaller knife. I can chop a lot easier with a bigger knife than a smaller knife. You can do a lot more wood processing with a larger knife than a smaller knife. But with length comes weight, and it's not as easy to control. And so I like to carry both. I like to carry a large knife and a smaller knife so that I can have the best of both worlds. But if you're going to spend big money on one, you're going to need to determine what length is right for you. And keep in mind that the longer it is, the heavier it is. And so if you're going to wear this thing on your belt, the longer it is, the heavier it's going to be as well. So keep all that in mind. The weight also determines on how fast you fatigue. So if you're going to be doing a lot of work, a heavier knife is going to fatigue you out a lot faster than a shorter, lighter knife. So keep that in mind before you spend big money on a knife. Next, we're going to talk about handles. Now, handles are made out of a lot of different materials. Here we have wood, micarta, rubberized handle, plastic rubberized handle, G10. Now, that's all personal preference. The handle material you're going to have to study to see which one is the best for the work you plan to do with your knife. But things you need to keep in mind is, 1, the material it's made out of, 2, the ergonomics, how comfortable it is in your hand. You don't want any hot spots. You don't want a spot where it's uncomfortable. You don't want finger groove that sits in the wrong spot, because what that's going to do is over time is it's going to end up hurting your hand, and then you're not going to want to use your knife anymore. So if you spend big money on a knife that has hot spots and it's not comfortable in your hand, you're not going to be willing to use it, and that's not good. So you're going to want to make sure that the handle is comfortable. It's made out of a good material that fits what you like. Another thing is you're going to want to pay attention to the tang. A full tang knife is going to be a lot stronger than a partial tang knife or a rat tail knife or a stick tang knife, whatever you want to call it. Full tang is going to be a lot stronger than one that isn't. But you also want to make sure that the handle, you can see how the tang goes all the way through this handle. That shows that it's full tang and it's a lot stronger, can handle a lot more heavy use than if it wasn't. But in the cold, you can feel that metal on your hand, where this one is enclosed, it's insulated, and so you can barehanded in the middle of winter, this isn't as cold as that tang exposed. I really like this Garberg because it's a full tang knife. You can see the tang sticking out the end here. It's full tang, but it's still insulated. There is no exposed tang here. So in the cold, I don't have that bare metal on my hand. So it's a lot warmer and not as uncomfortable as having that tang. And so you're going to want to make sure that when you're looking at the handle, you're going to want to look to see if it's full tang, if it's partial tang, if it's a folder. A folding knife has a lot of good properties as well, but the handle, you want to make sure that the locking mechanism locks really well in the handle. You're going to want to make sure this one again has metal liners inside that handle, so in the cold you do feel that. And so yeah, the handles play a huge role. This Gerber, Bear Grylls Gerber, has a plastic handle and it's hollow because it's a folder, and I can actually bend that in. And so I don't know how reliable or robust this handle is going to be. And so those are all things to keep in mind. You want to make sure that the tang, how the tang is in the handle, if it's a folder or a fixed blade, if there's any moving parts in the handle, if it's insulated, if it's not insulated, what the materials are. There's a lot of things that go into a handle, and again, it's all personal preference. What's comfortable to me and works for me might not work for you. So that's where going to a store and feeling a bunch of different handles and a bunch of different materials is really going to play a big role in what purchases you make when it comes to buying a knife. Next is going to be the balance. And so when you have a knife that's handle heavy, the balance is in the handle. The weight in your hand makes this a lot more controllable, right? So I can control this knife, but the problem is I have to do all the work. The blade's not helping me any. So I can put it exactly where I want it, how I want it. I'm in control, but I'm doing all the work. Where when you have a knife that's blade heavy, see how it falls blade side? So the blade is going to help me perform a lot of work, but sometimes it's going to go even if I don't want it to go. The weight of the blade is going to take it through that wood. And sometimes, it's not as controllable, but if you're going to be doing a lot of work, having that blade help you really saves on your wrists and your arm. I don't have as much control with a blade heavy knife, but I can do a lot more work because the blade's doing some of the work with me. Where in a handle heavy knife, I'm physically doing all of the work, and so I'm fatiguing a lot faster, but I'm not slipping up. I'm not accidentally going farther than I need to go. I'm in control. It's doing what I want it to do. So that's the difference in the handle balance. A lot of people like the balance right right in the middle. You know, it has enough weight in the handle to where I have most of the control. It has enough weight in the blade, so it does help a little. A nice balance point right in the middle kind of gives you the best of both worlds, and that's what a lot of people look for. But like I said, if you're looking for a chopper, you're going to want all that weight in the blade so that you're not hitting as hard as you can every single time. You're letting the blade do most of the work so that I can do a lot more work in one sitting without getting fatigued and tired. And so again, even with this one, this isn't as long, but the blade is heavy, so I can chop even with this little knife because all the weight's in the blade. And so I can do a lot more work, and I'm not getting as fatigued or tired using this knife than I would be with this knife, because this knife I literally would have to do all of the work myself. It would only hit as hard as I can hit, where this, the momentum of the blade helps aid and makes it a much better chopper. So again, that's something you have to consider, is where do you want that balance point in your knife. Last is the bolster or the finger guard. And so you can see some knives have a very large finger guard that prevents your hand from slipping onto the blade. And so this is a very good safety feature, especially for people that are just starting or don't use a knife very often. It keeps you from accidentally slipping onto the blade. The issue is the further you are from your hand, so wherever this hand is, the further you're out, it creates a pivot point. So then your wrist, you have to compensate with your wrist. And so your wrist gets kind of sore being out that far. So if you don't have that finger guard, you can get right up to your work. You can get right up next to it, and then your arm is doing a lot more of the work than your wrist. And so that's the difference there. Without the finger guard, you have to be extremely careful that your hand's not slipping on that blade, right? But your arm is doing a lot of the work. Where when you have that finger guard, you don't really run the risk of your hand slipping onto the blade, but your wrist has got to always stay. You're doing a lot more with your wrist instead of your whole arm. And so you got to keep that in mind. It's a very good safety feature, and it keeps your hand off that blade. But again, you might fatigue a lot faster, and you might not be able to get as much work done having that finger guard in your hand away from that blade. Even this companion, it has just this tiny little finger guard that doesn't really prevent your hand from slipping onto the blade. It's just kind of there as a reminder that, hey, you need to be careful, but I can still get my hand or my work right up next to my hand so that I can use my whole arm to get the work done, and I don't have to worry about my wrist getting cocked out. And so that's, again, something that you have to consider. Somebody that's new or doesn't use a knife more often, you might really like that safety feature. It might make you a lot more comfortable, and it might make you more willing to use that knife because you know that it's safer. But if you're careful and you do a lot of work, you might want something that you can get right up next to that blade. You do run the risk, but if you're going to be doing a lot of work, you're not going to want to keep cocking that wrist like that, because it'll get sore and you're going to fatigue, and you're not going to be able to get as much done as you probably would want to. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then the last thing you have to keep in mind is, what is your sharpening system? Where are your sharpening skills? A Scandi grind is really easy to stone sharpen, so if stone sharpening is something you're into, a Scandi grind is really easy. Saber grinds are easy to sharpen on a stone, but if you're really good at sharpening on a stone, I don't think you're going to be wanting to buy a recurve, because it's really hard to sharpen a recurve on a stone. Where if you have a lot of rods, if you have a rod sharpening system, that really opens up the recurve to you, because now you can sharpen it really easy with rod system. You can sharpen all these knives really easy with a rod system. And so how you want to hone and sharpen your knives, whatever is your best method and the method that you have readily available should impact what kind of knife you buy as well. If you have no way of sharpening serrations, maybe you don't want to buy a knife with serrations on it, because you know if it goes dull, you're either going to have to go buy something to sharpen it, you're going to have to send it off to get sharpened, you're going to have to learn how to sharpen these different knives with the system. And so whatever sharpening system you're most comfortable with, whatever sharpening system that you're more eager to learn and get really sufficient in, that should also determine what kind of knife you buy as well. So with all that being said, I want to know, what do you consider before you buy a knife? What is the thing that you feel out of these 10, what's the one thing you feel is the most important before pulling the trigger and buying a high-end knife? Leave any questions or knowledge in that comment section. I would also like to thank Rick P for sponsoring this video. He's my first Patreon. He's currently my only Patreon. I haven't even announced that I had it yet. He somehow found it and he pledged. And so if you want to check that out, the links will be in the description box below. We'll talk more about that later. And as always, make sure to like and share this video to help spread this knowledge and all these ideas to the people we care about most. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and come join the pack. I have a new video every Sunday and Thursday, and I can't wait to see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.